we on?
Hey. Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I think we're live.
All right, welcome to Better Utah Broadcast. My name is Katie Matheson. I'm the Communications Director here at Alliance for a Better Utah. With me today, we have a full table. So let's start over here. We have Syriac Alvarez, right, from the Utah Coalition of La Raza, right, and many other things as well, right? And then we have Laura Bandara, is that how you say it?
Yep.
All right, from Action Utah. Thank you for being here. And then as we all know, and Chase is, of course, our Policy and Advocacy Council here at Alliance for a Better Utah. So today we are going to be speaking about a number of things, but before we really get into it, I'd like for you guys to just introduce yourselves, tell us what you're up to, your background, stuff like that. So Syria, can we start with you?
Yeah. Like she said, my name is Syriac Alvarez. I graduated from the University of Utah last May in political science and sociology. I currently am an advocate for immigrant rights as an undocumented person. I truly believe in fighting for immigration reform and for the people who are more marginalized, for marginalized communities around us. And right now I'm working with the Utah Coalition of La Raza. It's an organization that advocates specifically for Latinos and Hispanic communities, but for all marginalized communities, and mostly towards human and civil rights.
Yep. Congrats on graduation, by the way. Well, I'll hold this up for all my random comments.
And I'm Laura Bandara, and I'm with Action Utah, which is an organization that started after the presidential election, and we work a lot at the state and local level on a range of issues. I work on immigration and refugee policy issues, and that falls under our families and communities, but we're up at the legislature a lot during the session. And our real goal is just to get ordinary Utahns involved in the policymaking process and to really try to make sure that, ordinary Utahns are heard and represented in the state. And I've gotten involved just seeing the kinds of terrifying things that have been happening in terms of immigrants being persecuted in this country. As someone, whose great-grandparents came here because of persecution, I felt like I really had as a U.S. citizen, a moral responsibility to step up and take, to speak out, especially when people who, people like Syria who are very brave but are really taking real risks. I think it's important for citizens and people to really speak out and say this represents the worst of our American tradition, and we need to figure out a better way.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank you for standing up.
Can you give us a little bit of background, Laura? I mean, you said that you are in particular are working on policy, and immigration policy. What are you guys up to right now?
So what we've found to be most effective in Utah is really trying to work at the local level and really model and implement kind of civil conversations. So one thing that we've worked on is meeting with local police departments about their U visa policies. So U visas are to undocumented immigrants in the U.S. who have been victims of a crime, and there's particular crime categories, including domestic violence. We've found a lot of confusion and misinterpretation in the police departments about their role in terms of certifying these applications, which then can be processed through the immigration courts. So we've had some success with just sitting down and talking to folks and saying, hey, let's think about this policy, and this is what this really means for you. And so hoping, that both to make our communities safer and provide a pathway to citizenship for some folks. Other thing that I've been working on right now, that's kind of my main focus, there is what they call an immigrant detention center, a prison for undocumented immigrants that's there is proposed to be built in Wyoming, just right over the line, which would serve the Salt Lake City ICE office. And We know there's a great group of folks in Wyoming that we're working with, but we also know that primarily the people who would be detained in this prison would be Utah residents. The people who want to build the prison, Management and Training Corporation, is a Utah-based corporation. Their headquarters are in Centerville. We have a lot of concerns about the track record of private prisons. There's multiple lawsuits against MTC right now for conditions in some of their private prisons. And then beyond that, there actually was a really great op-ed recently, but some court cases going on right now that show that these immigration prisons, I mean, what we're really talking about is someone who has a traffic ticket violation, right? A speeding offense, is being ripped from their family, sent to prison, and conscripted into forced labor. Because the way that these private prison companies make their money is by having the inmates run them, right? That's how it's profitable for them. But based on a Supreme Court decision made in 1896, immigration offenses aren't ones that can be punished. They're not criminal, right? You can't punish people and say you have to work. So I'm hoping that moves forward quickly, but yeah, so that's what we're working on here to try and figure out a way that, we know we have all these other alternatives that work, where people can stay in the communities, right?
And contract out currently with jails in the communities, right?
Right, yeah. And in fact, in Utah, they don't allow private prisons because they're so concerned about some of the problems and just really horrific conditions that people have had to suffer under. And
So-called catch and release is the other option?
well, so like we had ICE check-ins, right? And that was working really well for a long time, right? Where if people, if ICE said, okay, you've overstayed your visa, okay, you just go check in, right? And then they can work their way through the immigration system. I mean, again, it all comes back to the fact that our immigration system is so broken. The way I always try to compare it is like, going through the immigration system in the US would wish for like a month at the DMV. I mean, it is just horrific in terms of the bureaucracy. And just the kind of inability to move through it. So I'm just really deeply concerned about our community members being ripped away from their family members. And again, we don't have enough people with representation in Utah as it is. So this isn't going to make it any easier for people to get through the immigration system. It's just cruel.
So, Syriac, what are you guys up to at ULCR? UCLR, sorry.
So with Utah Coalition of La Raza, it started in 1992, so that we've been working for like 25 years. As an organization, right now we're a volunteer-based organization, so all of our board members, including myself, we're all volunteers, so we take our time, and we have a couple of different initiatives. Right now we're working really with education initiatives, immigration initiatives, and then just social justice, like civic engagement sort of work. With our education stuff, we are currently planning a youth symposium, so a Utah Latinx symposium, where we're going to take high school juniors going into their senior years, take them to Weaver for a couple of days, and then have them go through workshops, learn about college access programs, all of that, and then help them through the college process, or at least understanding it. And it's a lot of alumni, a lot of first generation students who are running these workshops, who are doing these things, just talking about different social justice issues, and doing that kind of work. And we're trying to get like 100, I think that's the number, of high school juniors.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. With our immigration initiative, which is the thing that I'm the chair of, we're doing a lot of different things, but one that we're really focusing on is doing actions, or sort of a push towards a reform for undocumented youth like myself. And so right now we're doing a lot of things that are trying to focus on trying to pass the DREAM Act and getting support from our Utah legislators, including our senators and our representatives. And we are currently also trying to do different projects that kind of show the human side of immigrants in this issue. We're trying to make a couple of videos where we show that, and not necessarily just talk about the numbers and like, you know, but actually put a story of somebody in our community about these issues. And then with the civic engagement, we are currently working on a couple of different things, but I think one that's focused that we're focusing on a lot is a kind of like a guide on how to organize, how to like know who to talk to or what organizations people can join to take action, because I think there's a lot of people, especially now, who want to do something but they're not really sure how to start. And so right now we're kind of trying to work on something where people can say this is something easy, a step you can take, an organization you can work with to start. And so a lot of our focus is doing a lot of different things, but getting people involved, getting people to be a part of the community, and, you know, fighting for issues that they care about. And I know for myself, it's been immigration, and that's why I've been doing a lot of work towards the DREAM Act, even before joining UCLR, organizing for young undocumented youth, because it's an issue that's important. There are about like 10,500 eligible DACA recipients here in Utah. That's like 10,000 people who are affected by this issue every day by our legislators' decision not to take action, not to do something. And every single day people lose status because of the court injunction that didn't allow people to renew their DACA for a while. And so now it's like an urgent issue that we have to keep pushing. And so most of my work has revolved around DACA recipients, around undocumented youth, to try to, you know, the place that they call home, the place that we've known, you know, we grew up in, to allow us to stay and continue contributing to our communities, because we have. And this is the place that we, you know whether or not it's a chosen home or not, we have known this place. And we have grown up here. I've been here for the past 17 years. It's important that we're recognized and that we're given the opportunity to continue to succeed.
Yeah, that's definitely an important issue. Do you feel that you are getting the support from federal representatives and senators for DACA? No.
I mean, just in general, there's a lot of people who talk, who say, yes, we support Dreamers, we love Dreamers, we want to create an action, but I don't see any action really taken from both sides. But I do think that our representatives, like focusing on our representatives in general, Senator Hatch was the one who helped introduce the first DREAM Act, but now he's kind of taken a step back towards this, and the legislations that he supports now are very conservative, very anti-immigrant. While they would create a pathway to citizenship for young undocumented youth, it would be at the cost of the rest of our immigrant community. And
it'd be tearing apart families.
Exactly. It would be like, we're going to give you citizenship, but we're going to deport your family members. And we're connected to the rest of the 11 million undocumented people. So we can't, you know, I can't accept something like while they have been openly supportive, they haven't taken much action towards this. And Representative Bishop has been pretty quiet about this issue, and so has Representative Chris Stewart. While I did get a chance to go and visit his office and talk to him, while he said, yes, I support, you know, a solution, I don't see them actually taking action, actually going forward and saying we need a solution now, and especially after the March 5th deadline passed, and now that it's not really a hard deadline anymore, there has been both kind of a like step back from everybody to say we have time, but we don't, because there are 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds who would have been eligible for DACA that will not be able to use that. There are, and there's no way to live. I mean, at least for myself, it's no way to live to like just keep living on a 2-year basis, wondering if the next 2 years are going to be certain or not. And like not being able to really plan for your future when you're not really sure if DACA is going to continue after these 2 years, if DACA is going to continue after those next 4 years. And so for me, it is important and urgent, whether or not they see it. They do need to take action. And about 80% of Republicans support a solution for young undocumented youth. And it's not just here in Utah, it's everywhere. It's all around the state. So it's not like people are opposed to this issue, not opposed to finding a solution for us. And especially with the family values that are so heavily ingrained in Utah, and especially in the kind of support that is given to families, especially immigrant families here, from having in-state tuition, it's surprising that there hasn't been a solution, or somebody from our delegation, from our representatives that have, you know, stepped up.
Well, and I just want to also quickly add that, you know, we are seeing two certainly in other states, that immigration activists who have, you know, may have unclear status are starting to be targeted. And so again, I think it's really, really important for U.S. citizens to step up. And then just to go back to the issue, I think a lot of people don't understand how many mixed status families there are, that there's a lot of people who, you know, the immigration system is so messed up that, you know, people can be married to someone from another country and there was one thing that happened and now, you know, they have a lifetime or something really minor, again, like a traffic ticket type of offense. And so, you know, but that's just an example, but there's all kinds of, it's just very common, right? So when we talk about 11 million undocumented immigrants, you know, they're completely woven into the fabric of this country, right? I mean, and that's what we've seen time and time again, is people just being shocked that people are being ripped from their communities. And then I just quickly do want to add that one thing we're both working on, which I'm excited about, is with the Enriching Utah Coalition, which is an organization that kind of brings together lots of different groups working on a whole range of immigrant issues, that we're working on a strategic plan. And so we're gonna have a retreat in a couple weeks to move forward with that. And I'm hoping that, you know, just getting a bunch of us in a room and getting a plan together will help us to really communicate the needs of the immigrant community to the broader Utah community.
That's great. That's great. So I want to get into kind of the body of the conversation. There are three things that I wanted to talk about, particularly because they're things that are kind of staring us in the face at the moment. Of the many things that are staring at us in the face. So the first one is the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act. It's something that's fairly specific, but I wanted to go over it. What is it? What does it do? What is the need for this? So Chase, can you give us kind of a rundown of what the Protecting Sensitive...
What it does? Yeah, I'll give like the policy stuff, and I'll leave why it's important to you guys. So Protecting Sensitive Locations Act has been around for about a year now. It builds off of a 2011 memo from ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, outlined its policy on enforcement actions for sensitive locations. So that included schools, hospitals, places of worship. And so it said that immigration officials weren't going to go and detain people or target people for detention at these locations. And so they're going to be protected sensitive locations. The Protecting Sensitive Locations Act would codify that memo into law and then also expand it. So instead of just being schools, hospital, churches, it would also include courthouses, medical treatment or healthcare facilities, schools, school buses, school bus stops, so parents could take their children to the bus stop and not worry about being detained. Food banks, domestic violence centers, congressional district offices, public assistance offices, social security offices, and DMV offices. So basically all these different government-related entities that are essential for, I don't know, a community or for people in our community.
Yeah. So Syriac, can you tell us why is this important? I mean, we know why it's important, but can you just talk to us about it for a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, the importance of having this is that it doesn't just affect us. Like, it's not just the people who are detained, right? It's not just like the mom who's detained, but it's her daughters who watch her being detained, and to watch her being detained in a school, like to go drop off your daughter at her school, right? To go take her to a school and then have your mom like deported right in front of you. That's traumatizing, that's heartbreaking, and that's just wrong. There was a couple of cases, actually. There's one, I believe her name was Raza. It was a young 11-year-old girl with cerebral palsy who was detained while she was getting medical treatment. And to expand, like, to be at your worst moment, to have, like, you know, to be living in such a difficult, you know, situation, and then to have ICE come into your room and say, you know what, after this, we're detaining you, to have ICE officers outside of your room, right, at 11 years old, and even anybody, right, anybody, doesn't matter if they're kids or adults, to have ICE officers at your door while you're like getting treatment as a patient, you know, it's just wrong. And speaking for myself, I think to have these safe places at least give, you know, some kind of feeling like, you know, not everything is going to be feeling wrong, right? It's not going to always be difficult. There are places where I can be and not have that fear that while I'm at church, ICE can come in and take myself and my family. While I'm at the hospital, getting treatment, that, I could be taken away. That while I was at school, right? While I was at college, right? That when I was in college, that, those college officers that won't work with ICE will not, take away my fellow peers, myself, from a classroom, from a learning place, from a place that's supposed to feel safe. I think it's important not just for us, but for the people around me, right? You don't want to watch your classmates being deported. You don't want to watch these things happen because it's traumatizing and it's wrong. And, it goes back to the whole issue of ICE, right? Like what they're doing is wrong. The way they're doing it is so awful and wrong. And to have them continue doing it in places that are supposed to be safe, it just shouldn't happen. And I do believe that this is important because it not only just says a memo, it's not just something well, it's kind of a rule we have, but it solidifies it. It says, no, this is the rule that we have. This is the way we're supposed to do it, because ICE is often done things the wrong way, and they get away with it because there's a lot of things that they do and have done that there wasn't really any follow-up because there's not a lot of laws that restrict them
instead of just guidance.
Exactly.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really important for people to understand is that this makes everyone less safe, right? The idea that I think there are times when people say, oh yeah, it's terrible, but it doesn't affect me, right? Or, well, but they broke the law, right? And again, it's a misdemeanor, right? We're talking about a traffic ticket offense, a speeding ticket offense. But we do know that ICE has shown up with lists of names in courthouses. I mean, they're going over the rolls. And so if people are afraid to, when a crime has been committed, to go to the police, that makes all of us less safe. I mean, I heard of, and this is just one small example, but for example, in Provo, there was a case where someone's house, there was a guy who had a student visa, and again, student visas are tricky, and he couldn't get the, correct status. He was working here. His house was burgled and cleaned out. Right? I mean, everything was taken from his house. And so it was clearly a professional job, but he was terrified to go to the police because, he didn't want his status to come up. And so that means that there is still this person who is, a very good thief who can, clearly do that to anyone else. And so that's part of our issue too with the U visas and trying to really get people to understand that this does affect you. Our communities are all knitted together. And so, there's obviously this really deep human perspective of nobody wants to see a child ripped away from their mother. And like you said, I mean, it's traumatizing for everyone. And in many cases, we know that people are being sent back to countries that have an incredible level of violence. I mean, they wouldn't have, people wouldn't have left and taken those risks if there wasn't some, I think, real deep fear or consideration that they needed to leave. Maybe not in every case, but certainly the majority, right? And so, everyone wants a better life for their kids, right? That's what everybody wants. I've never met a person who's like, oh yeah, I want my kid to just suffer, right? And so, I mean, I think when we look at it that way and we understand, right, we're all connected here, that if this act passes, that would be incredibly important for us in Utah to just expand the places where people feel safe. And I mean, we also know that, for example, with the driver's license, that's become an issue where undocumented folks, we worked to get legislation passed so that they could have driver's permits. Well, ICE through those records. So now people won't sign up, right? So we're...
How our community functions, not just for the people. Yeah, it basically is going to tear apart how our community functions. It affects the justice system. It affects all of our laws, our systems that we do, not just for the people who are at risk of being detained, but for all the people who rely on a well-functioning government system.
Well, yeah, and like a driving privilege, that in itself, the driving privilege is something that allows undocumented people to drive legally, right? It lets them get a car, get auto insurance. So when you take that, like, when you add that fear of like, if you get a privilege, a driving privilege, they might take your record and then you might be deported. Then somebody doesn't want to get a driving privilege. Then they don't want to get, then they can't get driving insurance, right? Like the car insurance. Then they, like, their cars are at risk. Then when you crash into somebody without, you know, insurance, when you have all of these things, then it affects you. It affects our whole community. It makes us all unsafe. Yes. Adding the driving privilege was that, like, it gives them the opportunity to say, like, hey, I want to have a driving privilege. I want to be able to drive, able to pay my insurance, able to pay my car. But when you take that away, when you add that fear, then it just affects all of us. And not to mention that all of these people, the Trump administration has created everybody as a first priority. That means that regardless of whether you are like, have like these huge crimes committed or not, you're still a priority because you're undocumented. Where like 60% of undocumented immigrants live in the US have lived here for over a decade. 60% of us have lived here over a decade. I've lived here for 17 years. And even despite that, despite being ingrained, you know, woven into our communities, despite living here for so long, you're still a priority. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, we're not just protecting people like, right, criminals or, you know, people who have offenses. We're protecting everybody. Yeah. The whole, like, protecting this act, it protects everybody, people who have lived here for the past, you know, 10 years, people who have lived here for a really long time, and making us all safer. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is important, and that it's not just us, right? It's not just undocumented immigrants. It's all immigrants, refugees, and all of our community that's affected by these things. Yeah.
Okay, so that's, again, if you're just jumping in now, that's the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act. Chase, what's the status of that?
Yeah, so it was introduced around the beginning of last year once the Trump administration started becoming more hostile towards immigrants. Mm-hmm. There are 50 co-sponsors, all Democrats in the House, and I think about 20 co-sponsors in the Senate, all Democrats again. Nobody from Utah has really spoken up in support of this or signed on as a co-sponsor. And so we're really encouraging people to reach out to our senators and our representatives to tell them to support this legislation. We actually just released a action alert that people can use. I'm not sure if we're putting it in the comments on the video right now, mm-hmm. but it includes a script for things that you can say. It gives you the numbers. Once you enter in your address, it gives you the numbers to call. So I'd encourage everyone to go and do that and call, just so our representatives know how important it is for Utahns that we pass this act.
Yeah, this, to me, just really boils down to, like, a human issue. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, it's compassionate. And so I imagine what's frustrating is to hear a lot of lip service and then to see nothing happen, right? So this is, you know, this is something that's easy. You can make a call to our senators, our representatives, many of whom are up for re-election, so you know you can mention that when you call and say, you know, this is what you say, show me what you do, and you know, call and ask for this. I mean, this should be easy. This should be like a no-brainer.
Actions speak a lot louder than words. We need more actions to help protect the immigrant community rather than just them saying nice words.
Yeah. So I want to dive into the next one, which is kind of a little bit wonky, but I think it's really, really important that we have this conversation, and that's this issue with the census. So what is going on right now with the census? There's a question, right, that they want to add. Chase, can you give us kind of a background on what's going on?
Yeah, so this the Trump administration through the Commerce Department has proposed that for the next census, that's going to be in 2020, there's going to be an added question asking people what is their citizenship status. This used to be a question that was on the census before, but it got transferred to a different type of survey, which is called the American Community Survey. But they're proposing to have it added back to the census again. And I guess that's it for exactly what's happening. There's been a lot of pushback against it from across the country with tons of different communities. And I'll let one of you explain why.
Yeah, I think there's the number of states that are suing about this are at least in the teens at this point. And I mean, really, again, this is the same kind of issue. It affects everyone because it's really all about dollars. It's all about federal dollars, right? So if undocumented immigrants are, afraid to participate in the census, then we're not going to have a real count, right? And while people say, oh, they're trying to target blue states, well, it affects red states as well, right? There's a lot of undocumented folks in, in Texas and and throughout this country, so. Like one of the issues, if you look at, for example, with school funding, right, federal funding for schools, well, if our count is incorrect, then the schools aren't going to turn away students, right? They want to educate kids, and so if your school's funding is based on a number that's lower than the actual number of students, that means your kids are going to be in a bigger, have bigger class sizes, and they're going to get less education as a result. So that's just one example, but I think that, this is really, it's just one of those things where you're just actually shooting yourself in the foot by doing this.
So the idea is to just kind of walk you through it, because there have been some people who have been pushed back on like, they're saying like, this is not an issue. It shouldn't be an issue to ask this question. It's information that should be asked. Why is it an issue?
Well, I think it's important to ask why now, right? Why after 1950, I don't remember what year, I think it was 1850, why are we adding this question, right? After it hasn't been a question for a really, really long time. It's a political move from the Trump administration. He has throughout his administration, throughout his first year, he has created a lot of policies and a lot of rhetoric that is anti-immigrant, anti-refugee. This is just yet another action taken, right? It's not just about asking a citizenship question. It's why we're asking it now, and why we need to ask it now, right? If it wasn't a big issue before, then why is it an issue now? And it does affect funding. It does affect writing these numbers affects, the number of even electoral that we're going to have, right? It affects the number of funding that government agencies can allow to each state. And if there's less of a count, then there's less amount of funds. And it is directly attacking people who aren't citizens. But we need to ask, right? What about aspiring citizens, people who are going to become citizens, right? It's important to have an actual count. It's not the question itself, but why we're asking this question, right? There are about 160 mayors, 19 state attorney generals, and members of Congress who are against this. So it's not like it's just a bunch of, just a small number of people who are against this. It's a lot of people who are against this because there is a direct attack towards immigrants and their families.
Well, and just also, again, given the kind of information sharing environment that we have, and that's a big discussion right now with privacy, I think their concerns would be well-founded that this information would be shared with people who would then use it to target them.
And then the fear is, so I just want to connect the dots, and just in case it's not clear, the fear is that people won't fill out the census, right? That they won't respond, because there's fear of this question on the census. So multiple problems with that. For one, the census is constitutionally mandated. It's a requirement that we count all of our people, right?
Not just citizens.
Not just citizens. Everyone living here needs to be counted in the census. And given the environment that we're living in, particularly, frankly, given the way in which we've kind of made dreamers guess whether or not they're going to be able to have, we've taken their information, they've given all their trust to the federal government, and then they've been told, oh, well, maybe not. And then to have this question asked, the fears, of course, that people aren't going to respond. And so I think, Chase, the number that we found was that 6% of children in Utah are living in households with family members.
And those are children who are citizens.
Right.
Yes.
And so that is 6%. I mean, you want to talk about funding for schools, that is going to be a big problem if this goes on there. And there's also a question of of course, the timing again. Usually questions are studied for 2 years before they're put on, and this was rushed through. And there's a lot of concern from people who have been doing this for a long time about just a general reaction and actually getting an accurate count.
Yeah, and I would it's beyond schools. The reason we have a census was for the electoral representation, but most things that the government provides are based on the number of people in a state. So it's education, it's highway dollars, It's all our social services like Medicaid, Medicare, all these things that, I mean, undocumented immigrants, immigrants who are about to be naturalized, refugees, they're going to be using these services anyways, and we're going to be losing out on money if they're scared to take the census, and so they don't get counted.
Well, I mean, even like all those social services that you just named, undocumented immigrants can't qualify for them. Medicaid, CHIP, Social Security, all those benefits, we don't use them. So it doesn't affect us. It affects the rest of our community that needs those dollars, that needs to use these things, right? So it's not just like, the thing is, it's not just an issue about us. It's not just an issue about asking the question, because if it was, then they would be okay, because the question is already being asked in a different survey, right? It's about actually trying to limit the power, the number, like limit the numbers that are counted towards these programs that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, it points out why we need an accurate and complete census. This was actually something that the legislature focused on during the session. They passed HCR 12, which was urging Congress to provide for an accurate and complete census in 2020. Theirs was based on the funding, because it's severely underfunded this year, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to do
The
a complete
census is
yes,
underfunded.
or
Okay.
it's not. It's going to be really underfunded for 2020, and so this is just another thing that's going to make it so it probably is going to be inaccurate and not completely counted.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think, in addition to everything that we've talked about, this is sort of, again, that overreach in terms of drawing electoral boundaries, right? I think there is definitely part of this is the hope that by again, by census, that you can control how district lines are drawn.
They have a huge stake in this. California has a huge immigrant community, and a lot of people in California feel like this is the Trump administration attacking them for the very stuff they're doing and just everything they're doing to fight against the Trump administration.
All right, so if people want to, I mean, they can call their legislators and ask them to speak out, right?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that we're looking into, Sean Reyes, Utah's Attorney General, he was not one of the states that decided to join in this coalition in suing over this edition of the question. And so he could possibly another person that we could start putting pressure on, saying, why aren't you standing up for Utah and everything that we stand to lose? Because the immigration population is huge here. I mean, it's a significant population, hundreds of thousands of people.
25 workers are undocumented here in Utah.
Yeah.
We're like 15th.
Yeah, I mean, again, in terms of, again, aside from the fact of the fear that people are living in, yeah, I mean, I think in our construction industry, right, which we have this huge construction boom here, it's 1 in 7 workers are immigrants, right? And so it really does, again, impact all of us, because that also goes to affordable housing, right? If we can't build more housing, we can't make housing more affordable for everyone. And so it's sort of like this, you know, every time you try to, you know, go after one thing, there's this whole chain of events that you unleash. So.
Why they usually take 2 years to study a question.
That would make sense. Yeah. All right, so we got to wrap up. I do want to mention really quickly the last one that we didn't get to, but I just want to let people know about it. So there was a recent, speaking of ICE directives, there was a recent directive in ICE to treat pregnant women like all other detainees, which means that they're not getting the health care that they need. And there have been a couple of situations in which women have miscarried because they're not being attended to in the way in which they need to. You know, pregnant women oftentimes, you know, need prenatal care. I mean, they always need prenatal care. So that's just something that's kind of on our minds. It happened, I think, this week or last week, so very recently. Do you guys have anything quickly to say about that before we wrap?
Well, one thing I just really would like to emphasize is what we've seen again and again in Utah is that ICE is going after mothers, right? And so to me, this is that same part of that kind of Trump administration, that just unbelievable bullying, that to go after mothers and children. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Wow. Okay. All right. So let's close on that terrible note. So you can follow us Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Better Utah. Make sure to subscribe to our emails, and you can click Get Reminder when we go live. How can we find you guys on social media?
You can find me on Twitter, Ciriac Isbeth, IRIAC Isbeth, ISBETH. I tweet a lot about immigrant rights and things that you can do to take action. And UCLR, Utah Coalition of La Raza. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter. Follow us, and you can join if you want to be part of UCLR. There's a link on our website that says how to join, and we'll get in contact with you.
And go to actionutah.org, which we have just a ton of resources for to learn about issues in Utah, and also how you can get involved. We do have an immigrant and refugee action team, and so you'll get periodic updates about issues that you can get involved in your own local community or at the state level. So actionutah.org, it's just a phenomenal resource.
Perfect. All right. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will be back next Wednesday, 12:30, for another episode of Better Utah Broadcast. Thanks, guys.
Bye.